All right, so 3:02, I think we gave everybody enough time to get on. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Hydro-Raking 101 Regain Control of Your Water Body webinar in our series of webinars here at Solitude. My name is Joe Honorato. I'll be your host today. Before we get started, just a few things to note. If you can please just mute your phones or your computers so that we can avoid background noise. It'll just make everything go smoothly and then everyone can just enjoy. We're going to record this webinar, so if you want to watch it later on over and over and over, or if you want to share it with a loved one or another Lake Association member or coworker, you can do that, and we'll be sure to send out a link. The other thing, and it's great, is a questions feature on the right-hand side of your screen. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use that feature to submit them, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the presentation. Towards the end, so before we end, and if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to, of course, get back to you. So submit those questions, get them in. We love seeing them. So it's great to see so many people here. You know, a few hundred, and I think even more than that signed up, and will probably trickle in. But we have visitors really throughout the country, all the way from the Northeast down to Florida, Texas, and California, and really everything in between. So it's really just great to see so many of you that care so much about your water body. So we're going to structure this presentation as some information so you can learn about the hydro-raking technique, and we're also going to answer throughout the presentation various questions and answers that we get all the time. So kind of the first top 5 questions that you would want to know about hydro-raking. So we're going to make it interactive. I have my panelists with me, which I'll introduce now. So again, my name is Joe Honorato. I'm a business development consultant here in the Northeast. And then with me, I also have Keith Gazelle, who you'll see he's over on the right side of your screen. He's our Director of Lake Management for the Northeast, the North and Mid-Atlantic regions. He has over 20 years experience really in all facets of lake management. And then I have Jeff Castellani in the middle, who is our Director of Mechanical Operations. Jeff really oversees all our hydro-raking projects and has for more than a decade. So they'll be answering questions really throughout, and it should be interactive and it should be really fun. So let's get the presentation going. So just our agenda that we're going to go over today. I'm not going to touch on these too much because we'll get into all of them in detail coming up, but the water body life cycle. So what is that life cycle? What does it look like? What is that aging process of a pond typically, or any water body? Question number 1, what is a hydro rake, right? We all want to know what that is. That's why we're here. How can the hydro rake, what are the applications for a hydro rake? So how does it work? What is it meant for? What is it best suited for? What are the benefits of hydro raking? And then lastly, as I mentioned, we're going to wrap up with your questions and answers that you submitted throughout the presentation. So life cycle of a water body. So really, it's a process called eutrophication. That's just a fancy word for the natural aging process of a pond, or any water body. So much like I get older, I get wrinkles, my metabolism slows down, as you could clearly see from my video compared to my profile picture on the last slide there. Ponds get older too. So they really just want to fill in with vegetation. They want to become a wetland. So that's really just a natural geological aging process of a pond. So effects from that, just that natural aging process, are excess nutrients and impaired water quality, odors, algae, and then nuisance aquatic plants. So there is a process called cultural eutrophication that really speeds up that process. So that's really anything introduced from either the watershed or in the water that speeds up that process. So it could be, things like fertilizers or other runoff from the watershed, or things in the water like invasive species that really are not meant to be in that water body that tend to spread very rapidly and take over. So essentially the hydro rake is just a tool we can use to try and slow down or even turn back the clock on that aging process. So we'll really go into the first question that everybody's really here to answer and here to hear the answer for. And that question is, what is a hydro rake? So what is it? And you can see the pictures there, but I'll throw that one over to Jeff Castellani to really answer that question for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So again, we see a picture of the hydro-rake. Our hydro-rakes are actually home built, not manufactured. Consists of basically a hauler barge with a backhoe arm attached, and which consists of a boom and a dipper, and a York rake attachment, a farm implement, which we modify for this application. It's propelled by paddle wheels, and the hydraulic pistons and hydraulic motors are all operated through a diesel engine and a pump. We use biodegradable hydraulic fluid, which is primarily vegetable oil. The hydro-rake drafts in about 18 inches of water. The arm, although it's 16 feet, to be most efficient in our operation, we are able to go down to depths of 10 feet. It's transported on a flatbed tilt trailer. Very easy to get to shoreline as long as we have the right grade and the right width in order to get it to launch. The only other thing I can think of that you might be interested in is its weight. It weighs about 9,000 pounds. And with that, I will turn it over to Joe to talk through a brief video of the hydro-rake process.
Thanks, Jeff. So we're going to roll a quick clip, and I'll kind of talk about what's going on in this process. You can see the hydro-rake in action that Jeff just described. All right, so here we have the hydro-rake. You can obviously see the arm that Jeff mentioned and the York rake attachment with the head. So here we're actually raking emergent water willow. And so it looks like it's dropping this scoop of water willow on the ground, but really it's actually on a transport barge. So in this location, the offload site was further away from the management area than what we'd like. So in terms of efficiency, we used a transport barge. So that video is really showing just one scoop of many, many, many scoops that was dropped on a transport barge. And you can see it here in just the still shot, the transport barge just getting loaded with just that emergent water willow. And so once that fills up, it's actually not a powered barge in this case. So once that fills up, the hydro-rake will use its own propellers, its own motion, its paddle wheels to push the transport barge to the designated offload site where a piece of equipment will unload that barge. So next up, we'll just talk a little bit about the management applications of the rake now that you've really seen it in action, even one scoop. So what the hydro-rake can and can't do. So really we gear it more towards unwanted vegetation. So it really lends itself typically towards emergent vegetation, such as the water willow we just saw, or even Phragmites, which we're all familiar with, or floating leaf vegetation, so lilies and things like that, because it can actually remove the rhizomes. You know, it can also remove organic matter, such as leaf debris, sticks, even small trees, things like that. So also plant root mat, peat, etc. So typically we're using it really to restore water flow to coves, inlets, outlets, even create channels, really in targeted areas such as beach areas or shorelines, dock areas, things like that. And so really the effect of that is we're preserving open water space. So again, going back to that water willow video we just saw, that water willow, that emergent species, was essentially just encroaching on open water. And the hydro-rake preserved that space by essentially removing the water willow as well as the root mat along with that. And again, just preserving the shoreline is another great feature of the hydro-rake. So we'll take it into our next question, which is, why should I use hydro-raking for aquatic plant control? I'll throw that one over to Keith, because Keith is really the expert in my book on all things aquatic plant management. So Keith, you know, why should we use the hydro-rake for aquatic plant control?
Thanks, Joe, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, Joe, like any other aquatic plant management technique, there are certain scenarios or conditions that favor or limit the use of hydro-raking as an effective management tool. So really, like all other management strategies, it's important to have a good sound understanding of specific site conditions, target plant species, and really the overall management goals and conditions and objectives in order to properly evaluate the efficacy and benefits of implementing hydro-raking. But I guess typically hydro-raking is used, as you stated, to remove kind of emergent plant species, floating leaf species, really any plant that has large defined root structures. Not necessarily the most efficient means to control submerged plant growth. Not to say that it's not able to manage submerged plant species, but because of the small hair-like root structures, it really just requires a more thorough raking process to kind of achieve the long-term control that we typically see with larger, more defined root structure plants. So probably important to note with respect to invasive plant species, invasive submerged plant species in particular, generally not a technique that we would recommend for the control of those plants. Any plant that reproduces through fragmentation, meaning broken plants, broken parts of the plant could reroot and create new clones. So hydro-raking, generally not recommended for that. However, in some instances, we have used it successfully to manage invasive plant species where in systems that are completely infested, there's really no potential to spread the plants elsewhere. So when I think about hydro-raking and the benefits of hydro-raking in comparison to really all of the other available aquatic plant management techniques, I think of area selectivity. The hydro-rake really lends itself to the specific control of certain areas of plants with limited to no non-target impact to adjacent plant species. So really successful at doing that, and as a result can be species selective as well. If you had distinct patches of a certain plant species, Phragmites you mentioned, or other emergent plant that you specifically want to control, again, the hydro-rake can be effective at controlling that without having impacts to neighboring plant species. So in systems that may have limitations to the use of other management techniques like rare, threatened, or endangered plant species, the hydro-rake could be an effective tool for managing unwanted plant growth in the presence of those sensitive species. In addition, the fact that it removes both the vegetative portion of the plant and the root structure, it provides multiple years of control. So in essence, kind of a systemic plant control technique. In situations where there are potential water use conflicts with other management techniques, such as the use of aquatic herbicides and potential irrigation restrictions or drinking restrictions, the hydro-rake can be used effectively to manage plants under those circumstances as well. But I think when I think about hydro-raking in particular, the primary benefit that I think that's unique to hydro-raking is that it removes all of the plant biomass. And in so doing, there's actually a net benefit to the overall nutrient load to the aquatic system. So we can, in essence, reduce the amount of available nutrients that could potentially spur the growth of additional plants or in algae in some cases. So really, as you talked about eutrophication being kind of the natural process of a pond becoming more productive and being able to sustain more plant and algae growth, hydro-raking really has the ability to slow that process by removing the plant biomass that would ordinarily annually die off and decompose in the system.
That's great, Keith. Actually, a follow-up question. What do you think about using the hydro-rake for control of water chestnut or really any other annual seed-producing plant?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be effective for sure. By removing those plants before seed production, you can have a successive reduction of the amount of plants that regrow. It's probably, again, most effective in kind of hard to access areas, shallow water, oxbows or coves where the water chestnut may be growing. Typically, we're using another technique called harvesting in large open water instances for the control of water chestnut. Really the same technique, removing the plants before seed production, but the hydro-rake we've used in many instances to assist kind of that harvesting effort where those larger harvesting machines don't have access to.
Thanks, Keith. And we will actually touch on harvesting briefly a few slides later, so later in the program. So right on your screen while Keith was talking, you saw this beautiful, this just dramatic before and after. So believe it or not, this really is the same pond, really from the same vantage point. So in this one, this is actually Lake Patricia in North Carolina, where we were removing encroaching maiden cane. So we're actually going to roll a video, and I'll let Jeff talk about this project some more. So this video is actually from this project, and it can kind of show you how we got from point A to point B.
Thanks, Joe. So as Joe said, this is a project on Patricia Lake in North Carolina. We'll wait.
So as Jeff mentioned on this one, this is maiden cane in North Carolina, and that was really just the heaps and heaps and heaps and mounds of the maiden cane. And actually, I can let Jeff elaborate a little bit further on what you saw there.
Yeah, I pretty much think the only other thing I can think of is we actually had 3 different offload points for efficiency of the removal operation. Again, the closer we are to getting that material to the shore, the quicker or more efficient the hydro-rake is in the operation.
Now, Jeff, how long was that trail of material there?
It was over a mile, and there was actually 2 rows that extended over a mile.
Okay, and then after that, what did you do with it? Where did it go?
So in this case, it was the local TPW that did the onshore operation. And once that decomposed a little bit and dewatered and shrank down, they brought it to their local compost facility.
That's excellent, excellent. So we'll roll right into another question, keep this moving. Big question here, can a hydro-rake remove sediment? So in these photos here, this is from Deer Harbor, actually in Maryland, where you can see we were removing root mats, leaf litter, and sticks. So you could just kind of see all that material in both of those photos there. And I'll throw that question over to Keith. So Keith, can a hydro-rake remove sediment?
Yeah, that's a good question, Joe. Although the hydro-rake is primarily designed and used as a vegetation control technique, it certainly has the ability to remove unconsolidated organics and other accumulated bottom material, such as leaves, sticks, stumps, prash, and other things. So it can be effective. I guess it's important probably to note that it is really not a dredging technique. So if you have designs on removing, thousands of cubic yards of material, this is probably not the most appropriate methodology or machine. You're probably better equipped to handle a project like that with kind of true dredging techniques. I think it's probably important to kind of think of the use of the hydro-rake in this manner as, again, a maintenance tool. And so it's typically used on a smaller scale, really to remove, accumulated materials in, areas of water conveyance, inlets, outlets, to restore kind of proper or optimal water flow. it can be used effectively to maintain stormwater basins, to provide and restore kind of the storage capacity of the stormwater basin, kind of accumulation of material in and around stormwater outfalls in lakes and stormwater situations. So it definitely can be effective. So, I mean, I think it's probably important to, I guess, understand that, you know, this is, you know, a versatile machine, although, again, it's typically a vegetation management technique. We've successfully used it to accomplish a wide variety of different projects. We've used it to remove stumps. We've used it to kind of enhance fish and waterfowl habitat by kind of creating variations in bottom depth characteristics, edge habitat. We have used it to create emergent shelves for the establishment of kind of an emergent plant community along the border of you know, smaller ponds. We've also used it to spread sand in beach areas and other things like that. So it definitely has the ability to perform a lot of functions. It's probably important to, if you have a specific project in mind, to talk to one of our aquatic specialists to understand whether this might be, you know, a good fit for whatever project you may have or whatever goal you may have for your pond.
Thanks, Keith. And as Keith mentioned right there, you know, the Hydro-Rake is a versatile machine. So while Keith was talking, we all got to see these just, again, dramatic befores and afters. So I'll let Jeff elaborate just a little bit on these, since he was really the one overseeing these projects here.
Thanks, Joe. So on our left, this is a project at a campground operated by Massachusetts Department of Recreation that had been closed and somewhat abandoned for a period of years, and a lot of emergent growth took over the edge and actually open water of Middle Pond. This first picture up on the upper left-hand corner is actually emergent phragmite growth just starting. And below you can see that the hydro-rake and actually some physical labor was used to remove that vegetation along the sand, the beach shoreline, in order to restore it. And also in that picture, if you look in the upper picture again, it looks like the phragmite growth and some of the woody brush growth is along the shoreline, but actually that is extending out into open water, which you can get a better visual of if you look to your right at the upper picture before. You can see all the emergent growth. And then the after picture, after the rake had performed the removal process. This project took about 2 weeks with 2 weeks of physical labor of a team of 2 and another team of 2, one operating the hydro-rake and one receiving the material from the shoreline. In this case, the material was placed in a dewatering area on site. And this was phase 1 of a project. We manage about 1.25 acres. And we're going back towards the end of the year to do approximately another 2 to 2.5 acres of management work.
Thanks, Jeff. That's fantastic. And I believe on the next slide here, we have another before and after that, if you just wouldn't mind touching on that one just briefly.
Yeah, so this is actually Krause Pond in Westwood. And again, we were removing emergent growth in order to restore some open water. The emergent growth is primarily purple loosestrife. And at the same time, we did remove some buildup of debris, organic matter, leaf litter in order to create some flow within the pond, in order to also to create some more depth or recoup some depth, basically restoration.
Thanks, Jeff. Awesome. So in an effort to keep it interactive, let's roll right into another commonly asked question. that I'm sure everybody wants to know the answer to is, how well does a hydro rake operate in different environments? So I'll throw that one over to Keith. I think everybody's getting a little tired of hearing Jeff talk for too long. So Keith, why don't you handle that one if you don't mind?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think just like the types of tasks the rake can perform are varied, so too are the types of sites that it can effectively work in. So we've used the hydro-rake really in any variety of type of water body, large lakes, estate ponds, stormwater basins again, river systems, fish and game club ponds. So really the sky's the limit with respect to where it can potentially operate. But like I had mentioned earlier, there are certain physical characteristics to any site that favor or limit the effective use of this technique. And those typically center around shoreline access, water depths, the raking area, bottom structure and composition, and to some degree the target plant species. So when I think about shoreline access, it's really about the deployment and retrieval of the machine, good shoreline access to get the trailered equipment to the shoreline to effectively launch it into the pond. And then, as Jeff kind of indicated, the rake has no onboard storage, so that it has to deposit each rakeful either on a barge, but ultimately bring it to the shoreline for final kind of loading and disposal of the material. So there needs to be a suitable site to effectively accommodate kind of that operation as well. Water depths, the hydro-rake probably best operates, and Jeff said it drafts about 18 inches, so probably best operates in about 2 feet of water to effectively propel itself around, and then can physically rake to probably a depth of about 10 feet. So that's important with respect to the hydro-raking location. And then the bottom composition and structure. So if there are a lot of obstructions, boulders, large stumps, rocks that are not part of the removal, and really the rake can't effectively remove large rocks, there has some inability to kind of work around, a high density of boulders or rocks. So we do have various size rake attachments that facilitate being able to work around some of that, but if it's really too dense, it may not be a good site for the use of the rake. And then target plants, again, any plant species that are reproducing through a fragmenting process, then the hydro-rake is, again, probably not the best option. But with all that said, I think it's probably important to note that really all of our hydro-rake operators have years of experience and continue to amaze me with what they're able to do with these machines. I've seen operators removing large stumps that probably weigh nearly the same amount as the machine. And in terms of launching it into certain sites, we've routinely overcome kind of these impediments where we often will crane the machine into certain water bodies. I've seen the guys actually unload it on dry land and then have it pull itself into the water. So, I mean, I think it's important to kind of note that we are going to assess these various conditions really on a site-by-site basis. And so if you are interested, again, or think that hydro-raking may be a fit for, incorporation into your management program, it's important to call us and kind of let us evaluate those techniques, because I think as much as I'd like to be able to kind of provide you with a answer one size fits all, it's not that. I think it's too nuanced and varied to be able to give you kind of a solid answer.
Thanks, Keith. I do have a follow-up question for you, just real quick. Is there a better or worse time of year to operate the hydro-rake, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think typically we would prefer to have the operation be conducted when the target plant species are visible to the operator. But I guess in today's technology, that's not always necessary. We can effectively map the locations of plant removal and enter those and kind of create polygons using geographic information systems, and then load those into GPS units to guide the operation in the field. So they don't necessarily need to be able to see the vegetation. And given the fact that this technique is removing the root systems, the vegetative portion of the plant doesn't necessarily need to be active for you to achieve good multi-year control. But really, if there's no hard ice on the pond, we can probably conduct an operation.
Thanks, Keith. I think it's probably best maybe we'll recap some of the benefits of what we've learned so far. So it's just some of the benefits of the hydro-rake. So really nuisance plant control, and as Keith literally just mentioned, typically 1 to 3 years, and that's because the hydro-rake can actually remove the root systems on many of these target plants. And as Keith also just mentioned, it's adaptable to the environment. So, time of year, obviously there's better and worse times, but we can get around a lot of these with the hydro-rake, and it's also very spot specific. So we can target just small areas, where there's species either protected or threatened that you don't want to impact, things like that. You can really adapt that, this tool to the environment. It's also very environmentally friendly. I think as maybe Jeff mentioned earlier, we're reducing nutrient loading by removing a lot of that plant biomass. And then also just, with stormwater ponds, they're designed for a purpose. So they have, a function. And so the rake is a great tool in stormwater ponds to really preserve the outlet inlet structures, just all those structural components so that it can effectively work the way it was designed by that engineer.
Yeah, I guess somehow we lost Joe. I guess I can take over. So I'm not sure where he was in the process there, but maybe we skip to the next slide and start working on that one.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened with my sound. Can everybody hear me now? I guess it wouldn't be a webinar without one technical difficulty. So, again, I'm not sure where you lost me, but I started to get into dredging. So essentially dredging is considered the ultimate reset of a water body, whereas hydro-raking, as Keith alluded to, is more of a maintenance technique. So dredging is really, it's costly, but it is effective. So there's really 2 types of dredging. You have traditional and hydraulic. Hydraulic is really a pumping system that's pumping a slurry, so essentially water and sediment mix to some type of a dewatering basin or geo bag. So you typically need a lot of space to dredge. You need some type of storage area to allow that material to dewater. Or you have traditional dredging, which may involve really lowering the water level to the point where you've actually drained the water body, which can be difficult in certain circumstances, not impossible, but definitely just a different process than hydro-raking, which is, again, is more maintenance. So I think that's probably all we'll say about dredging. Maybe we'll have a future webinar on dredging at some point. So we'll move into another alternative plant removal technique. So mechanical harvesting, which we touched on briefly earlier. So we'll kind of just take it by the slides here. So in the slide on the left here, you have the harvester really removing invasive water chestnuts. So you'll see essentially the harvester is more so a floating lawnmower, I say. So it's really just cutting the material. It's not disturbing the bottom. So you'll see the harvester cutting the water chestnut. It goes up the, from the cutting table, it goes up the conveyor to the back storage conveyor, where it then, once that machine fills up, it moves, you'll see in the image on the right, it moves to the designated offload site where the conveyor then lifts and can deposit that material, in this case, water chestnut, into either a container or directly onto the shore, of course, with hay bales and things like that in place. Or it could be, a container, a dump truck, or if it's on the shore, we could use a third piece of equipment really to just lift that material into, some type of a dump truck or container where it can be permanently hauled away. So, again, it's just cutting vegetation. It's not removing the root systems, but it is, reducing the density of annual plant growth. In most cases, we're using it for water chestnut, but there are other, management scopes that we'd involve the harvester. And another piece to note is, you saw in that first video, we have a transport barge that's not powered. So if the offload site is very far from the management site, or even not that far, but if it makes sense from an efficiency standpoint, in some cases we'll use the harvester to be used as a powered transport barge, where we'll actually use the rake and we'll put the material on the harvester. And then once the harvester fills up, it will go to the offload site where it can unload and then go back to the management area to be filled back up again. So that's really harvesting in a nutshell. And we'll really just sum it up, and then we'll get to some more of your questions. So hydro-raking, it's flexible and it's extremely selective, geared towards, as you'll see in that image in the center here, dock areas, beach areas, or just spot-specific management areas, shoreline areas. In some cases, we'll use the hydro-rake to essentially just remove vegetation and root mass, leaf debris, things like that from just general shorelines, where lake associations will circulate a sign-up sheet where the private homeowners can sign up for just a few hours just to clean up their shoreline, or in and around their docks, beach areas, things like that. It's definitely environmentally friendly, and of course you see by the dramatic befores and afters, it's very effective. Aesthetics are just a piece of that. The maiden cane was more of an ecological issue, but of course there is an aesthetic benefit to that as well. And really just going back to that eutrophication process, we can extend the life of the water body, potentially even turn back the clock on that eutrophication process. So let's jump right into some of your questions and answers that you submitted. So we've obviously answered kind of the top few that we typically get, but we did get some really good ones. So we have one from Mitch M in Massachusetts, and I'll throw this one over to Jeff. So this question is, we've been hydro-raking off and on since the 1980s, and our biggest issue at the moment is disposal of the piles. So what do you think the best method of disposal is?
Hey Mitch, it's Jeff. So again, going back through the video, the most efficient way the hydro-rake operates is actually to place the material on the immediate shoreline adjacent to the project. And in your case, I know we do a lot of shoreline hydro-raking for different property owners on Leverett Pond. We can move the material, as Joe had discussed in the previous slide, with the use of a push barge or harvester. And then once we determine a designated area, we'd have a loader or similar piece of equipment that would receive the material and either place it in a dewatering area, place it in a container, a dumpster, or place it into a dump truck. And then we'd have to find a local compost facility or disposal facility to move it to. From an efficiency point of view, again, placing the material on the shoreline is the best, and probably also from a budget point of view, it's probably best that we place it on the shoreline versus involving multiple pieces of equipment in transportation of the material. Usually, The use of a local landscaper is probably the most cost-effective approach for an individual property owner, but on a large-scale project, it makes sense to use a harvester or a push barge or some other piece of equipment that we can load the material on from the project site and get it to a centralized area.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, we have a lot of great questions, so I'm just going to keep them rolling. I'll throw the next one to Keith. We got that actually a few people asked about this, so I can't name names, but there was a few people that asked about hydro-raking effects on fish and aquatic wildlife.
Yeah. Well, I guess if I interpret the question as, are there negative effects on fish and wildlife? I mean, I think the short answer is no. The hydro-rake is relatively so. Fish and other wildlife can escape kind of the operation. Turbidity created as a result of any raking process is very short-lived, usually settles out within 24 hours. I think as a whole, really the hydro-raking provides an ability to kind of enhance the habitat for fish and other wildlife in aquatic systems. As I mentioned before, we've conducted a number of different projects where we have really focused on the enhancement of kind of the habitat quality of the system. And so, again, have created kind of varied depth contours to create deeper water, different water temperature gradients, and create edge effect for fish species, improve nesting habitat and access for various waterfowl species. So I think as a whole, again, the hydro-raking has the ability to improve conditions for fish and other wildlife in, I'll say, an impaired system.
Okay, and so another good question from Sonia H. in Connecticut. I'll throw this one over to Jeff. Do large ponds qualify for this service, and is it successful in larger ponds? And I think I'm just going to add my own question to that one as well. So Sonia's question was in regards to large ponds, and I know you mentioned the weight of a hydro-rake, but I don't know if you mentioned the size. So maybe you can frame that same question in regards to small ponds as well. Is a pond too small potentially?
So in the relation to a large pond, again, I guess it's based on the application, what management application the hydro-rake will actually be performing. If we're trying to create extensive depth, recoup depth from the buildup of organic matter in a large water body, can it be done? Yes, but is it efficient as far as the amount of time or duration it would take to do that? Probably not. At that point, if we're trying to really recoup depth in a large water body, we're probably best off thinking more of a dredging technique. But in that large water body, absolutely, if we're thinking of restoring water flow or depth to coves, inlets, outlets, dock areas, or just property shorelines. In a smaller pond, that's actually ideal for hydro-raking. Like you said, I did mention the weight before was 9,000 pounds. The hull itself is about 24 feet long by about 8 feet wide, and when we add the paddle wheels, it's 12 feet wide. But it's able to maneuver in small areas. And going back to there was a depth question also. It drafts in 18 inches of water. But as we remove material, we actually can, and we recoup some of that depth, we're actually able to get into areas that weren't accessible before the hydro-rake started its operation.
Thanks, Jeff. So next question we got from, this one is from Mark B. in Virginia. Can a hydro-rake remove sediment from a clay-lined pond? I'll throw that one over to Keith. Maybe talk a little bit about the hydro-rake's effect on liners.
Geez, why do I always get the hard ones, Joe? That's a difficult question. So, I mean, I think the short answer is probably yes. I think there's a lot of variables. As much as I hate to kind of give a wishy-washy answer, I think there's a lot of variables at play to really determine whether or not the use of the hydro-rake could have undesirable impacts to the system. So, is the pond truly perched above the water table? How thick is the clay liner? What type of clay liner it is? What are we targeting in terms of removal, aquatic plant species, accumulated organic material? So I think all of those things would ultimately depend on the final answer as to whether it would be an applicable technique. So I guess I would give it a strong maybe.
Yeah, and Joe, we have done clay liner ponds before. And the rake operator knows, again, if you think of that York rake attachment, it's not something that digs, it's something that actually, if you want to think of it, can comb. So the rake operator is able to remove buildup of organic matter or root structure or debris, and we'll know when it hits that clay surface at the bottom, and it is able to slide that rake head over it rather than dig into it.
It's great. Well, since I gave you guys that hard one, I think I may field this next one myself. So this one came in from Jeff M. in North Carolina. The question is, can hydro-raking be included in my annual management plan? So as most of you know, there is no one and done management technique. So in most of our projects, whether it be a large lake or a small water body or a golf course pond, you name it, it does require some level of annual management. And so I'd say in most cases, hydro-raking fits into that same bill. So, we of course realize everybody has a budget. So in some cases, we may look at a project and, cost it a certain way. But the beauty of a hydro-rake is that, yes, you can kind of work towards that goal on an annual basis and, just allot X amount of time or X amount of money towards that project to get to your goals rather than trying to do it all in one shot. So in the case of, say, a small ponds annual management program, I've had certain instances, a few with golf courses, private homeowners, things like that, where they, we have a management program with integrated monitoring and a variety of techniques, and we loop some annual hydro-raking in there really to target, the plant biomass and leaf debris, things like that on an annual basis. So the short answer to that question is yes. So we'll go right into another one, unless either of you have something to add to that. But next question we got from Rich W. in Florida. And the question, I'll throw it over to Jeff, is can hydro-raking be used to restore a pond bank due to erosion?
So yes, I mean, a hydro-rake can be used in order to remove some of that material right at the shoreline that has washed in to the water body, and there is some technology that we're definitely starting to employ in different areas called sock, which is actually, it's a material made out of knitted burlap that is photobiodegradable and biodegradable over time, and it's been proven to really shore up a shoreline so that it doesn't continue to erode. And some of that material that's taken out from the hydric process can be placed in it in order to create that surface within it that you can actually put a seed mix in, or you can put seed mix on top, or you can put plant plugs in, or actually put a, in case of a golf course, probably the best application is actually just put turf right over it. The amount of material that's placed in a sock, depending on the project, there's probably more material that would be taken away versus all the material actually going into the sock as we restore the shoreline.
Thanks, Jeff. Great answer. So we'll give Keith another hard one. I like to pick on Keith with all these hard ones here. So this one came from Joe M. in New Jersey. Is permitting needed for hydro-raking, and how much sediment is allowed to be removed below the roots of the plant?
Yes, another one that I have to give probably a wishy-washy answer to. Permitting, I think it varies drastically from state to state, water body to water body, community to community. So yes, in some cases it does. And with respect to regulations or restrictions on the implementation of specific hydro-raking efforts due to regulations, again, that varies widely as well. I know that in New Jersey, the actual regulations associated with hydro-raking are kind of currently in flux. So I have even less definitive answer for you. But I think really in order, like I said, with respect to the conditions that favor or limit the use of hydro-raking, it's probably important to evaluate the need for permits and other regulatory restrictions on a case-by-case basis. So again, if you think that this is a technique that you may be interested in employing, I encourage you to contact one of our specialists to review kind of what is required from a regulatory standpoint.
Thanks, Keith. I'm actually going to throw in one of my own questions. I know that we have some good ones, and we'll get to those. We still have, another 7 more minutes or so, but I'm going to throw this one to Jeff because I know we didn't touch upon it. What's the cleaning protocol on a hydro-rake? I know everybody's concerned about the spread of invasive species.
Oh, whether it's a hydro-rake, a harvester, whether we're going out to do a herbicide application with a john boat or an airboat, our cleaning protocol is always to make sure that we removed any attached vegetation from previous projects through actually hand removal, through power washing. In some cases, we allow the equipment to dry for a period of time. And also, if necessary, because we're going from project to project, we will bleach it so that we fill up plant material that's still on the machine before it goes in the water.
Excellent, excellent, Jeff. So another hard one for Keith. This one came in from Wayne C. in Florida. How effective is hydro-raking in delaying costly dredging?
Yeah, I think it absolutely can be effective. Again, as a maintenance tool, and as you kind of indicated, incorporating kind of a smaller scale, annual level hydro-raking effort really has the ability to prolong the duration or really slow the buildup of accumulated materials that would ultimately require dredging at some point. So, I mean, not to say that it could, if implemented early on in the development of the pond or when accumulations are low, I think if done religiously or annually, hydro-raking could certainly almost indefinitely delay the need for large-scale dredging.
Okay, and then we have time for a few more here. I'm going to throw one back to you, Keith, and then another question to kind of follow up on that to Jeff. So it's just a general question because we got a lot of them in terms of the costs of hydro-raking. So I guess, can you just touch on that just a little bit?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, it varies based on target plant species, the location, access, in terms of mobilization and setup for the operation. Typically, we're charging anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a day for the equipment, plus mobilization and disposal operations. So, in terms of productivity, it's really varied from, we could be particularly productive with smaller, less robust plant species and can accomplish a lot of work in a shorter amount of time. But, we may be talking in the neighborhood of, 40 to 60 operation hours to effectively rake in the neighborhood of an acre. So it can be a slow process. That's kind of a rule of thumb. But again, you probably have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and provide, program specific costs.
Okay, that's great. And kind of a follow-up question, I'll throw this one to Jeff. This one came in from Steve H. As part of those costs, do you include hauling and disposal in your contract line items?
So again, we always have an initial conversation with a representative of the collective water body as to the on-water cost and then the onshore cost and the disposal cost. And depending on that initial conversation, we'll either include pricing to do the onshore operation and the disposal, or we'll list it as an option. And then the client can decide based on their budget and the cost, whether it would make more sense for them to coordinate that onshore material handling and disposal effort.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we probably have time for one, maybe two more questions. This one came in from Emily P, and I'll throw it over to Jeff. Is hydro-raking recommended or necessary after chemical herbicide treatments in a lake? So what she thinks she's seeing is, she said the treatments were successful, but she's starting to see a lot of plant biomass and things. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about how hydro-raking could pair with an herbicide application?
More with floating leaf herbicide applications, where actually, whether it's the treating with in water or through a topical application, we'll tend to see some of that biomass and the root structure rise to the surface. And in that case, in a lot of cases, we actually team up after the herbicide application in order to remove that biomass so that it doesn't continue to add another layer of accumulated organic matter to the bottom and decrease the water depth. For submerged vegetation, I guess the biomass isn't as great as it would be with a floating leaf or with the floating leaf root structure. As Keith had discussed before, that submerged vegetation really has a finer root system. It can be used in order to remove that the root structures and the decaying organic matter after an application. But I guess we'd have to consider how beneficial it would be to actually maintaining the water depth versus the accumulation of organic matter in that instance.
Thanks, Jeff. So 359, I guess we'll take one more, and I may actually field this one myself. So we got a question that came in Texas about just the availability of hydro-raking in Texas. So I guess my answer to that is, of course we have, a select number of these machines. So it is operating on a calendar, and I would just say that, can we rake in Texas or really any other part of the country? Absolutely. So you'd probably just want to call us because of course the schedule is changing on a regular basis. But Jeff's over there managing the calendar regularly, so we can have more in-depth conversations as to just the availability of the rakes, whether it be in New England or Texas or Florida or wherever. So again, every water body is different, and is hydro-raking a good fit for every single situation? Probably not, but I think if you had questions specific to your water body about hydro-raking, we're more than happy to answer them on a one-on-one basis. Take a look at the pond, and any data you may have to determine the best management strategy. It may involve hydro-raking, it may not, it may involve a few different strategies, but feel free to call our office. And it's 4 o'clock now, and if I missed anybody's questions, we'll be sure to get back to you. And again, this is recorded, so if you want to go back and watch it again or over and over again, or share it with a loved one or somebody else from your organization, we'll be sure to send the link to you so that you can do that. So it's been great, and everybody have a great rest of your afternoon.